Hi, I'm Rob Catton, two-time world's top eight competitor, and this is the third episode of the Fabled Academy Podcast.
Hey Rob, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining in today.
Yeah, really glad to be here.
Yeah, it's exciting this year, right? The second time actually that you made it to the top eight of the Flesh and Blood World Championship.
Yeah, which super thankful for. I think I prepared well and got lucky, so that's the main two things.
So we will not only talk about your top eight worlds this year, but actually also your whole journey in Flesh and Blood and what is up for the next year. So let's just start by you telling us like what actually is it that the top eight this year meant for you.
I guess it was nice to get the validation that you are like good consistently, I suppose. I think most players that I know, like you get this feeling that you think that you're good at the game, but you just want to sort of prove yourself to your peers and prove yourself in the arenas where the best players in the world, and obviously you're not going to get a better place to do that than the World Championships.
Yeah, and you already said it. It was the second time, and I remember the first time actually pretty vividly because I was there myself, and it was also that day that we met each other for the first time. We also did the deck profile afterwards, where you piloted Fire Rising Rebellion at the first World Championship, and this time actually you choose not Fire Rising Rebellion, but a pretty similar strategy, right?
Yeah, my wife has played a little bit of Aurora, and she describes it as like lightning fi. So she agrees with you. It's a very similar style deck. Um, I really like being proactive when I'm playing Flesh and Blood. I like putting my opponent to tough decisions, and I find aggro works best for that.
So would you say, like personally, the top eight this year at the Worlds was your highlight, or what was the highlight this year for you?
Yeah, I think Flesh and Blood didn't really sit at the forefront of my mind at the start of the year last year. So for LA and for Amsterdam, was LA this year? Well, for Amsterdam was definitely this year. Like Amsterdam earlier on the year, like I was getting married around that time. Like so, just after Amsterdam was our honeymoon. So I didn't put so much time into preparing. I did prepare a decent amount for Worlds, which just makes me feel happy that you got the result from it. When you put in the work, you see the results, and that's nice. Yeah.
So you you faced a pretty heavy strategy actually, a pretty heavy deck at the World Championship in your top eight match. And maybe you can talk a little bit about it. Like, was fatigue on the forefront of your mind while preparing for Worlds, or did you think like Aurora will just straight up go to the top eight?
So me and my friend Liam Holden, prepared together for this tournament. Both played Aurora, and we were both considering what basically the last two slots of our deck should be. We couldn't really get them two slots to meaningfully help any of the other main matchups that we thought we were going to face. Um, but we thought like maybe fatigue, maybe we can have something for there. But the problem we had with it is that there's so many decks so many opponents, and you can sit down across them in the rounds of Worlds, and you just don't know if they're playing fatigue or not. So you sit down from an Enigma, and you don't know if they're going to try and fatigue you or not. And you could put cards like Poison the Well in your deck against them, and you could reasonably lose to them because a normal Enigma deck because you've sideboarded in case they're fatigue. So we thought, let's just not bother. And obviously, kind of wish that we did bother. um, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that quarterfinals match in the last few weeks.
Yeah. So how do you think about fatigue in general in Flesh and Blood? Do you think like fatigue is actually at the core of Flesh and Blood? As a top player, you just need to prepare for it, and do you like it, or is there anything that you dislike about it?
Sorry, the second.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, sorry, the signal went a little bit there.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
open the door just in case. Um,
Yeah, sure.
let some more internet in. Yeah, so you're asking me if how much I like fatigue. And a lot of the UK player base know this. I really don't like fatigue. I really don't like that it's part of the game. I'm hoping that as time goes on, we'll see more and more strategies that different classes have so they can fight fatigue. Some classes, everybody knows that you can't fatigue that. Like, for example, everybody knows you can't really fatigue Enigma, and you can't really fatigue decks like Kano and things like that in a lot of situations. I don't think it leads to games that people remember and think that was a really good game, or people watching especially as well. I don't think it, at least, I mean, I rewatched my game in the quarterfinals and was, looking at the chat and stuff like that. So I don't think it's fun or good for the game, which makes me think I don't really understand why they printed Count Your Blessings. Insofar as like how I think about things and how I prepare for tournaments, I mean, a lot of my fatigue preparation goes into like local things where I know, oh, this player likes fatigue. I know that I'm going to need something for them. And the problem with it as well is that no one really practices against it. So I think I actually found, like, through playing against Kowalski in the quarterfinals, I actually think at the end of the game, I think I found a strategy too late during the game that if I would have done all the way through, I think I would have won. So I got part of the way there. Like, we theorised, me and Liam prepared before the night before, and we theorised that I should just be attacking with the weapon every turn. So, like, I think the commentators picked up on this. They noticed how I was playing and attacking with the weapon as much as possible and things like that. I think I should have, I think that was part of the way there, but I should have dialed it up even further. So things like every Enlightened Strike that I attack with should be for 7 damage, and every Somersault that I play should be bouncing an Enlightened Strike, so then I've got more damage in my deck. Every Channel Lightning Valley I play shouldn't be trying to draw a card with it. I should be trying to bounce a gun in a flash. So I just create more damage throughout the game. It doesn't really matter on one particular turn how much I was dealing. And I actually think if I could replay that quarterfinals, I think I would win every time now, which makes me feel a little bit disappointed in myself, because you never know if you're going to ever get that opportunity again. And I feel like I try not to think about it too much, because I feel like I've missed an opportunity to become world champion there. So, yeah.
How do you think it on the flip side? Like, you are a player that is very experienced in this very moment in Flesh and Blood. And for a new player that is just starting, like, how do you view fatigue for new players?
I think it's very confusing, because new players are just trying to get into the cadence of how turns go, because turns in Flesh and Blood are very different to, for example, Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering has more of a, you draw a card every turn and you make some sort of progress on the board. Whereas that Flesh and Blood, each turn is sort of like its own thing, where you sort of reset every time, obviously. And fatigue sort of turns that on its head. So I think it's hard enough for people to understand how to play Flesh and Blood in the first instance. And then when you introduce it's like playing Kano for the first time or something like that. Like, it's just like going, everything well, how about if it's like changed quite a lot? And fatigue just takes it that extra step. So I think it's hard for new players, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that Kano comparison is pretty fitting, right? Because when you're just starting out and you're going to your local armory, the first thing is actually understanding the core of the game, and then that one Kano player comes up, and that is the first time that you're actually thinking like, this game is so broken when Kano comes up, right? But it's also a challenge. It's very fun to figure it out. And I think actually it's pretty fitting that you say like fatigue, on tops that what Kano does actually for a new player. And what would you say like for a new player when they are encountering that first Count Your Blessings deck at locals, or that Fatigue Oldham in a Living Legend format or whatever? Like, what is the one tip that you would get out to the one new player here listening?
I think one avenue that players don't take enough, especially at small events like Armories, is literally having the conversation with your opponent on, like, you could feel free to say to your opponent, like, listen, I don't think I'm going to win this game, but I want to give you a challenge as much as I possibly can. So how do you think I should be playing in this situation? What should I try and be doing? Because most players don't really enjoy just absolutely crushing someone into the ground and winning 40-0. Like, that's not really what players play Flesh and Blood for, or at least not what most players play Flesh and Blood for. So I would have that conversation with your opponent. Obviously, at ProQuest, they might not want to help you out, but an armory or a skirmish, I think that's a much more reasonable question. If that's not an option and you've just got to figure it out yourself, I think my number one tip is to not, similar to what I was speaking to earlier, which is not to try and think of the game in terms of how much damage can I get through on any given turn, but trying to like zoom out and think of the game as a series of like 30 turns stacked together, and how much damage can I put, what's my game plan across them turns. So for example, like Chain is a really good example, because he didn't really need to do, his game plan was more like try and deal them 20 damage in the first like 8 turns, and then in turns 9 and 10 I'm going to deal them the last 20 because of all the soul shackles. So like each deck has its own like little plan, which is something you can do before the tournament. There's hopefully the Discords will be able to help out with that. Yeah.
So you were also talking about like the viewer perspective on fatigue, right? And in the World Championship in this year, it was kind of prevalent, right? Because also the finals were a very long game. And how were you thinking about it when rewatching those games from the outside?
I found it quite comforting that when I lost, so when I first lost, I was messaging my friends, and people like Hamish, for example, Hamish from Push the Point, he was saying like, everyone in the chat was on your side, and everyone in the chat was like saying you were playing it really well, which was really nice to hear. People thought that even in such a horrible, boring match, that they could sort of understand what I was going for. I think the match was something like 70 minutes long, and some people were still finding like people thought I played really well, which was really nice. I thought it was quite funny that there was a moment with a judge call because, the chat basically told them that I missed 3 damage because I played a electrostatic discharge, and then I forgot about the +3 in the next attack. And I think they then cut away so that you didn't actually see what the judge call, when the judge call happened and stuff. But Brian Gottlieb came over with his phone, and like he had YouTube on his phone, he had the stream on his phone, and we were like looking at like the video footage of what had happened to see if he had a card in hand he would have blocked with and stuff like that. So like I thought it was quite funny that they were going to a lot of lengths because they wanted me to get the 3 damage. Like I don't think in normal circumstances I don't think they would have done something like that, but I think that they wanted the fatigue deck to lose. So that was quite funny.
So in the next year, like when the next fatigue deck comes up, what is your plan to then get like 1 inch closer to beating those fatigue decks? Is there anything that you set up for the next year?
I think so. One part of why we didn't have the sideboard cards in was because we sort of, me and Liam said, well, we only feel like we can use them if we make top 8, and if you make top 8, then who cares? But I think that's sort of a confidence thing, because we're both assuming, neither of us are going there assuming that we're going to make top 8. We don't even think it's likely we'll make top 8. We think it's maybe like a 5% chance or a 1% chance. But I think maybe if I'd have been more confident and had more confidence in myself to do well, then I might have put them cards in, because then you're actually like planning for, not only am I going to do well at this tournament, I'm actually going to have tech for when I make top 8 so that I can win the tournament. And I think that's maybe what the sort of thing I need to start doing, is because it's not about top 8 in a tournament for a lot of things, it's about winning a tournament. Like there's a lot of decks you can bring to like callings and stuff like that, which you'll play the same deck as everybody else and you might make top 8, but what do you take to a calling that will win you the calling? And I think that's maybe the approach I'm going to start taking.
So is there like a mindset shift that you try to do in the next year? Because I view it from this, like Flesh and Blood for a lot of players out there is a hobby and a fun game to play, right? But then when you're getting to a moment like you did 2 times actually now, it gets kind of a little bit more serious, right? And also like a mindset shift might something that happen in a player like yourself.
Yeah, so the I actually had to buy the PTI for Worlds because I'd given two of the previous ones I gave them away and then ran out. So I had to buy a PTI, so that's like around $500, $600. I had to go by myself, take time off work and fly by myself to Japan, stay by myself. I feel like my mindset had shifted a little bit then because that's like it's quite a lot of financial quite a lot of money sunk into this. So like I mentioned about confidence, maybe that was the start of me having more confidence in myself because I felt like I could sink all that money into it and reasonably get something out of it. And I think to answer your question, I think I'm pursuing further down that line. So my wife has given me permission to travel to a lot more events. So I'm doing things like I'm considering flying to Sao Paulo for a calling, which is something I never would dream of doing. Like Brazil is pretty far away from the UK, and Germany as well. So things like that. Like I'm going to Prague in January. I'm considering going to Memphis at the end of January. I'm then going to Barcelona for a battle hard in February. So I'm going to try and go to a lot more events and just worry about money later on, I think is the plan.
Yeah. So you just brought up two pretty interesting things here for me to talk with you about. And the one thing actually is a little bit controversial. I talked actually about this in the first pod and also in the second episode, which is not out yet at the moment we record this. But it is actually like, what do you think about that is actually possible in Flesh and Blood, that you can buy yourself into the World Championship? And I think for players, there are multiple opinions out there, but I'm very interested to hear your opinion now, because actually you mentioned that you bought the PTI for this year.
I think, so I think it's a good thing on the whole. I think it's fine right now. I can't really see the downsides to it overpassing the good sides, because I think the upsides to it are it opens up the economy of when you win prizes that they're actually can be converted to money, which I think is important. So like the gold foil market has taken a bit of a dip this year, I've noticed, and a lot of players use that to like try and finance their way to get to somewhere, to get to the next event and things like that. And I think only bad things can come from like reducing what can be sold and bought. Obviously, LSS take no part of like trying to facilitate any sales or anything like that with the actual PTIs. But obviously, that's something that goes on. So I think it's fine. And realistically, any player who shouldn't have one or shouldn't be playing in Worlds won't do well in Worlds. And if they do well in Worlds, then maybe it's fine that they bought a PTI. So I don't really see the problem with it. So like, I think it's also pretty cool that someone. So say I know you had Simon Nielsen on recently. So like you had some who's obviously a very big, very successful in Magic. I think it'd be pretty awesome if he was saying to someone else who he plays Magic with, and says, "Oh, it's Worlds next weekend. You can actually come play if you want. If you wanted to buy a PTI, like I think that'd be awesome to have some like really high caliber Magic players just come and play our Pro Tour, because there's nothing but upsides in that regard, and I think that's something that could reasonably happen as well."
Yeah. So I'm on the other side here, I have to say.
Okay.
Like I would really love to see that the World Championship is a little bit more exclusive. Like I'm comparing it a lot to the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship, because there it's like only a handful of people ever can come in the year. And it's pretty difficult also because in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like even if you go to YCS, there are like 2,000 people competing for the title. And I would love to see a little bit more exclusivity at the World Championship, because it's the pinnacle, right? It's the biggest tournament in the year, and it's also the mark of like who is the best player of that year. I'm very happy actually that it's like possible in this year. Like I would be pretty sad if you wouldn't be able to compete in the World Championship, to be honest. But like I think when time goes on, like maybe not even in 2 years, 3 years, but when Flesh and Blood is a little bit more like how do you say it in English, like established. Yeah, established. And then maybe it's time to let the World Championship become a little bit more exclusivity. And that way also that the player that wins the tournament kind of like has to prepare like the whole year for it, right? Like you said, now it's pretty possible to just the week before Worlds. I'm sure that's not possible, right? Because the entry is like closing at some point. But
yeah, a few weeks
yeah,
before. Yeah.
yeah, but then it's like, okay, I'm pretty new to this. I just try my shot, and then I also like want to question it, like how hard is Flesh and Blood if a new player can come in and win the World Championship? I mean, that player would be like the best player of the world, right? But yeah, that's kind of the way I'm going for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be fine. I think what I said and what you said can probably both coexist because I guess for me, I was speaking more to PTIs in general, which I would be fine if you couldn't use a PTI to get to Worlds if you had to qualify in a specific way. So, like for example, top 80 nationals, I'm pretty sure that gives you a qualification for Worlds now, doesn't it? It doesn't give you a PTI. So if there were avenues to get to Worlds separate from PTIs, that would be fine. Yeah, so that would work.
Yeah. So if you think about the World Championship to be a little bit more exclusive, like how many players do you think should be competing in the World Championship?
I think just harking back to how it worked for Magic, the World Championship was often most of the time just another Pro Tour, like the very similar sort of event. I did quite like for the first one I top 8'd, that it was so different because it had Blitz as well. So it had CC, Draft, and Blitz, and I thought that was quite nice because it really differentiated it from a Pro Tour. So when they changed it to just be two formats for the later Worlds, I was a bit disappointed by that. So yeah.
I think like the question of how big the World Championship should be, or maybe becomes in the next couple of years, like we don't know it, but I wouldn't really like it if there are like only like 16 people in the World Championship for sure. But Simon told me also that in Magic it's like over 100 players in competing in the World Championship. So maybe that's like a ballpark that we are talking about in the future.
Yeah, it changed quite a lot in Magic because it went from being a big. At one point, it was a big Protoss size event with like a team thing alongside it, and then the team thing went away, and then it went from being like a big 300, 400 player tournament to being a 16 player tournament, and it's like just the best of the best of the best who were played in it. And now it sounds like it's got bigger again to be a 100 person thing again. For me, I think it's really important that the ordinary Flesh and Blood player can actually get there, and that's part of the reason why I stopped playing Magic, because I felt like the pro scene just far and away escaped what a normal person can actually play in. I don't think of myself as a pro player at all. I have a job, and that's what I do. And I feel like I can pretty reasonable. I can go to a tournament, I can go to a pro quest, I can win it, and then I'm going to the pro tour. That's just not possible in Magic, and I think that's such a failing of the card game. And part of the reason why I think Flesh and Blood's the best.
Yeah. So then also, I think what caters into that is like that the World Championship not only is the World Championship, but there are also other tournaments going on throughout the weekend, right? So other players, even though they could not perform in the World Championship, they can also play the Calling, the Battle Hardened, or any other side event that is going on, right?
Yeah, which is, that's awesome. even if you... And then there's the side events where you enter into them and you get the promos worth more than your entry fee. So like you're sort of like being paid to play Flesh and Blood. Going to Worlds is something I'm hoping to do. I'm hoping to hit every Pro Tour. I haven't missed one yet, so I'm hoping to hit every Pro Tour and every World as we go. So hopefully keep that alive.
Maybe you can tell me a little bit more about that excitement for the World Championship, because it is not only a tournament, right? There are a lot of things going on in Worlds, and I think this year they changed up quite a few things that are positive to notice.
Yeah, so speaking to the most recent one in Japan, it's in Japan for a start, which is obviously a huge deal. getting that massive player base involved. You get to hear about the next set that's coming out. So there's the exclusive keynote. It's pretty awesome atmosphere. As I'm sure you know, when you're there and you're seeing like all the stuff coming out live and everybody's responses to it. I mean, and there's so many people there. The cosplay stuff that they do as well is really cool. I've never really been that bothered about cosplay, but the one this year in Japan with I don't know if you saw the guy dressed as Zen who did like the whole performance, like spinning the.
Oh no, I didn't see
It
it.
was unreal in person. Like everybody in the hall stopped and looked at the guy dressed as Zen, and like it was. We stood there and watched it for like 2 minutes. Like it was amazing. And like I said, I've never been interested in cosplay before, but that was really cool.
And then also, I think this year was like a premiere, so to say, right? You even talked about it being a thing in Magic back then, with like teams coming up for the World Championship and having to compete actually not on your own, but then with like the three best people from your country.
Yeah, it's something that I'm really sad about that I've never really done that well at nationals so far. I've played in 3 nationals so far. I didn't play in the first one when I first started playing. I've done well in the side events around nationals, but I've never actually done well in the actual event, which I was especially sad about this year because of the team stuff.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk a little bit about it. Did you notice anything during the tournament? Because it's not only the first time, but it's also like you have to compete in 2 tournaments at the same time, kind of, right? You have to not only like concentrate on the big world championship, but then also the team cup thing. Did you notice anything from the players?
To be honest, not especially. I mean, I was obviously very focused on what I was doing, so there might have been stuff going on that I didn't notice. I do see a lot of like a lot of team shirts that have like I played against the Romanian player who had the Romanian flag on his shoulder and stuff like that. It's cool to see a lot of pride from the teams that not only are they on a team with like whatever name of the team is on their shirt and stuff like that, but they include the flag obviously with the Polish team, very very proud team. So like seeing that sort of stuff's really cool. We don't really have that in the UK, so that's interesting.
So maybe we see that in the future from the UK players.
Yeah, it's got a bit of a weird stigma attached to having the British flag on your shirt in the UK, because it's it's sort of a thing that's used from like far right groups, if I'm honest, in the UK, and
Okay.
as such, a lot of people tend to try not to do it because they don't want to be associated with that.
Yeah.
Which is a shame because you see, like I say, teams like Romania and Poland and France and other teams like that doing it, and us
Yeah.
British are a bit ooh.
Ooh, yeah, I mean, I can feel that a little bit, right? I'm German, but I think the Germans had a lot of flags on their teams, like at least the ones that I traveled with to the tournaments. And I think that's actually something that excites me all the time about Flesh and Blood. Not only like getting to know all the different players from the different countries, but then also players representing their country. I think like one very special moment, especially at the World Championship, it is also like the flag bearer ceremony, right? Where all the Nets champions come up and have their national champions flag, right?
Yeah, and I think I can't remember what country it was, but I'm pretty sure someone was wearing like cultural outfit, which represented their culture and their country, which I thought was really cool. I'd like to see more of that as well.
Yeah, so let's actually come a little bit more to like what the World Championship is maybe in the next year, because I want to hear a little bit from your side if you have anything that you think that could be improved on the World Championship for the next year.
Something this might be controversial, but I would expect more from the judges, to be honest. And this isn't talking about the yellow shirt judges. This is more talking about the orange shirt judges, because so when you're playing in a tournament like Worlds, there's going to be a bunch of different orange shirt judges. So I think there's one designated head judge, but there are many like judges that you can appeal to. So sometimes you will appeal and it won't be the head judge, but it will be an orange shirt, things like that. And just some of the things that I saw were just crazy rulings. Like one of my friends, Francesco Giorgio, was playing in draft, and their Yuki Lee Bender was their opponent, and they didn't have a weapon. And they called the judge when they realised partway through into the game, and the judge said, "Well, is there any options for what weapons your opponent can be playing?" And Francesco was surprised that the judge at Worlds was asking him a question. It's like, how do you not know that? Like, how do you not know the answer to that question for the limited format that you're judging on at Worlds? I won't go into the other judge calls that happened, but there was like a bunch of different things over the weekend that I would expect better from. I do sympathise that there's only a finite amount of judges, and there's also a finite amount of people who can wear the orange shirt and do that job. So I sympathise with that, but I guess what I'm saying is I would like them to be better prepared for what they're going to be doing. Like, you'd know that you're going to be dealing with this draft format, so maybe, get up to speed on that. Gem as well was, I don't know if you know about what happened in Gem in like the last few rounds. So it was the last round of the second draft. So that's like round 11, I think it was. I'm 2-0 in the draft pod. Michael Hamilton's 2-0 in the draft pod. We both have the same record. So we're both on the exact same record. Both 2-0 in the draft. And we don't get paired against each other because Gem screws up. And instead of pairing us, we both get paired against people who are a whole loss different to us. So we both get paired down. So both of us 3-0 the pod, which is like ridiculous, especially given it's Worlds. There was a 40-minute judge call into this where the guy who I think the CTO, the Chief Technical Officer for LSS, got involved because he was in charge of Gem. And that needs sorting. That can't continue. It didn't. I don't know. It's hard to say how much it matters in the long run. Like, you still play against an opponent and things like that. But for example, I think I would have. So I would have played against Michael. I think I would have beaten him. That might have meant in the next round I wouldn't have played against him on feature match and lost to him, which could have changed who I play against in the quarterfinals. It could have changed everything. So big deal.
So I can't relate on your side there. I've never been in the same situation, right? But I'm playing at my local armory, and things like that happen there too. And sometimes I wonder, like, what is going on? But definitely, like, for me, it doesn't matter at an armory, but for you, it's a big deal, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, my opponent, who I played against, I was the only wizard in the draft pod, so my deck was really, really good. And my opponent, who I had to play against in the last round, was obviously quite upset about this because I beat them, and he would have actually had a chance into somebody else maybe, but not into my deck.
Yeah. I actually, this is like my secret special like moment that I had when reading the World's article, and I saw your photo and there's your favorite card, Engulfing Flamewave. And then I saw like what kind of hero you are drafting. And actually I have to say, like, Verdance is my all-time favorite hero from Rosetta draft. I played a lot of draft actually in Rosetta season, and I want to hear your opinion on draft, but specifically on Verdance. Like, was it kind of that you saw like Wizard is open and Earth Wizard in particular is just so strong in Rosetta, or why did you choose to go down that road?
So I accidentally stumbled into some really good draft prep. So basically, I think it was the weekend before Worlds. I played a draft ProQuest, I think it was, or maybe the 2 weeks before Worlds, and it was my first time drafting the set. I drafted Aurora in the first draft, it didn't go well, and I drafted Verdance, and then Verdance again in the top 8. And in the top 8 one, I find myself with a deck with like tons and tons of wizard cards, not really very many Earth, just lots and lots of wizard cards, which I thought, I've got no idea if this is any good or not. And I found that Florins just couldn't beat it. So I found that they just don't, once they've used their macro, the Sanctuary of Aria, once that's gone and you can start to deal damage, because Earth doesn't have any way of preventing damage apart from the macro or the boots, well grounded. I think there's a Majestic that prevents some arcane, but obviously you don't really include that. So once they've got like no real way of preventing damage left, you can like rely on the surges actually happening and things like that. Florian's also really bad at converting cards in hand into actually doing something. So they only have one action point and they have 4 cards. And a lot of the time they just go attack you for 7. And Verdance goes, great, I'll block for 6 with 2 cards, or I'll block for 8 with 2 cards if you've got an embodiment. And then on my turn I'm going to weapon and I'll shoot you and you can't block it. So I found that as I won the Pro Quest and was like, this is amazing, and just kept practicing forcing Verdance, which is what I did in both of my drafts at Worlds. I first picked the Wizard Arms and then second picked the Earth Head, and just absolutely force it. I'm not decomposing, I'm not attacking, so I played no attacks in my deck, no decompose, because I'm not. If I do turn my hero power on, well, I don't have any cards that gain life in my deck. All I've got is cards that are wizards in block 3, and I went 6-0 in draft with that strategy.
Yeah. So I think it's very interesting because draft in general is not like the most part of Flesh and Blood that gets much attention online, but I think draft is just so interesting to tackle on in Flesh and Blood, and also it's ever changing, just like the classic constructed meta, right? With every set, and also there are these strategies that, like, of course, like in every set, there's like this one strategy that everyone like thinks it's the best thing, but then there's like, things that are coming up. I remember even in Worlds in Barcelona, I think Teklo Voss and Fatigue was a long way the best strategy, right? And then when we look at like what strategies won those limited formats there at Worlds in 2023, things were changing up, and that's what I really like. Like even the meta in draft and in limited is not settled during all of the season. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and if you can, like you say, get an edge in draft, it is so big, because if you look at the players who make top 8 of Worlds, it's not the players who went 2 and 4 in limited. It's not the players who went 3 and 3 in limited usually. It's the players who went 5 and 1 or 6 and 0 usually, because it's so hard to get an edge that you're never going to sit down and construct it and go, who you playing, and they go, I'm playing Betsy. Like when you're like winning in, it's going to be, you know, some of the top decks. Whereas if you've got some sort of strategy in limited and you know more than they do, then it can pay massive dividends.
Yeah. And I kind of want to come to this a little bit later, but let's actually talk about it now, because we are having the new set just around the corner, right? And we also have a new limited season, a new draft season in front of us. So what are you really looking forward to in the next season when it's up for draft again?
I love that with this draft format, they made it so fatigue wasn't an option, really. Like, you can't. Some games do go to fatigue in Rosetta, but generally because of the arcane damage, it means that it doesn't decide the game. Like, someone dies through fatigue usually, like fatigue through damage sort of thing. Whereas Tekla Bossum was one of, I think, and Bright Lights was one of the worst limited formats. So I'm hoping that it's got some features which mean fatigue isn't an option. That can be. We're probably not going to see arcane damage again just after Rosetta. We're probably going to see, hopefully, something like more cards that block 2 or more cards that reward you to not block. Better weapons is a big deal. Part of the problem in Bright Lights was that, you know, Max had a weapon which meant he had to fatigue himself, and Dash had a weapon which wouldn't go forever and things like that. So hopefully they focus on that side of it. I really like. It looks like it's going to be 4 heroes, right? It looks like it's going to be 2 chaos and 2 draconic. I'm hoping, which I think is a nice place to be, given how we've just seen Rosetta. Yeah.
And I mean, we will both see each other in January in Prague. So that will be the first time actually that these new cards will be played. And what is actually, this experience like? Did you play it this year in Rosetta, the world premiere?
No, so my wife was saying, oh, you're going to Prague next month in January, you better prepare for it. And I'm like, we won't know all the cards. So like the preparation is going to be the Friday event where trying to save up our prizes together so that we can play some drafts and maybe buy. See if the judges have got some boxes for sale, things like that. I don't know. So it's going to be interesting trying to figure things out on the fly. I've never had that experience before, so that sounds pretty challenging. And again, like we've said already, that having an edge in limited is such a big deal. If you can be the first one to figure things out in this format in Prague, then see you in top 8 sort of thing.
Yeah. So I think like what I want to talk with you now is like not really dabbling into the hunted so much, because like this episode will be up 2 weeks after we record it, and maybe there are more spoilers that reveal things. But I really want to talk with you about like the next year and you handling Flesh and Blood on the pro level, because I actually know that the top 8 placement at Worlds is not like your only success in Flesh and Blood, right? Maybe you can talk a little bit about what your successes in Flesh and Blood besides the Worlds look like and what you aim for in the next year.
So I've top 8'd a calling. I top 8'd a calling in New Jersey with Chain way back in the day. So that was the calling alongside the first Pro Tour, which I didn't make day 2 at. Lost in the quarterfinals to a Polish player playing Stava. I think it was the guy who won as well, playing Stava. I've won... Have I won 2 battle? I think I've won 2 battle hardens. I've won at least 1 battle harden, maybe 2. I think 2. The one I kind of remember is though obviously the one with Prism more recently, which was cool because I got to do something brand new. I've top 8'd a handful, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 maybe battle hardens, and obviously lots of ProQuest wins on the local scene. Nationals, like I say, I've not done too well at Nationals. I had a little spree going where I would win the side event PTI event. So like the very first Nationals I went to, I didn't actually qualify for it because it was Tales of Aria. I literally just started playing the game, but the ProQuest or the PTI event, sorry, on the Sunday was limited.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't need a deck to play. I didn't have a deck, so I thought I'd play that, and I won that event and won a gold foil Arcanite Skullcap, which was pretty cool, yeah. And then the next year at Nationals, I won the side. I won with Fi. It's actually on YouTube as well. So I had like a little spree going where I wouldn't do well in Nationals, but I would win the side event, which is cool. So hoping to break through at Nationals this year, because that's the one, I guess, the one arena I haven't really proven myself.
Yeah. So I think like competing in Flesh and Blood has so many different sides to it, right? It's not only the different formats and the ever so evolving meta, but it's also being a competitor in the game. And maybe you can share with us like what is the most challenging part about competing in Flesh and Blood for you?
It's a good question. The most challenging part of it, I really enjoy all of it, to be honest. Like I enjoy traveling. I enjoy the actual playing of the games. I get quite nervous, to be honest, at the start of a tournament, because maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I find the most challenging. Because, so for example, Japan at Worlds, like I'm nervous. The first day of the tournament, when I wake up, I just feel instantly nervous. I was nervous the night before because I'm currently 0-0 in the tournament, and things can only get worse from here. And that's sort of always what's in my mind. Like as soon as I'm a few rounds in, especially obviously if you've won a few rounds, you sort of like, okay, things are going all right now. But I just get really nervous at the start of a tournament because it's been in my mind for like the last month or 2 months, and I don't want all that build up to just lead to me doing like going like an O2 drop or something like that. I also do something that's totally against what everyone recommends you do. I eat and drink very, very, very little during tournaments.
Oh,
Yeah, which is not what you're meant to do, obviously. Sometimes I'll have a bottle of water, but often I won't, and I won't eat the entire day. Which means I always get to have a good evening meal because I'm starving. But usually, maybe that's due to the nervousness where I don't have an appetite before I'm playing. During playing, I'm just not thinking about food at all. Which isn't recommended. It's not. Everyone's different, right? But I guess it works for me in some in some weird way.
So I know this is the challenging part about it, right? Because Flesh and Blood is all about playing the game. But then when you are competing in a high stakes event like the Pro Tour or the World Championship, even something like the Calling or a Battle Hardened, suddenly like things that have nothing to do with playing the game itself become much more viable while being at the top, right? Like you said, being hydrated, getting some food, having a chill mind and stuff like that. I think even it's a little bit comparable to athletes that compete in sport, but definitely it's different, right? How do you view yourself, like when you are wanting to compete in Flesh Blood much more serious in the future? Do you view yourself like an athlete or more like a casual like competitor in a TCG?
So I'm quite into chess. I watch a lot of chess and consume a lot of content with that, which I think is sort of, yeah, like you say, comparable to being an athlete, because I've read that chess professionals can use a lot of calories throughout like a day of playing, and it's a lot of
Yeah.
mental strain. I don't think Flesh and Blood is quite as bad as that, though it depends on the deck that you're playing, really. Like, if you some decks and some people actually choose what decks they're playing down to how taxing they think it's going to be throughout a long day of playing. That's never been something that I've been interested in doing. Um, I can't. I don't think I can say that I treat myself like an athlete. I don't have a good diet right now, and I don't. I'm definitely not as healthy as I used to be. So I don't think I could say with good conscience that I think of myself as an athlete. But maybe I should do. And well, I say maybe. I definitely should do. Like that's it. It can't do anything bad, really. I don't think. And I don't think my not eating or drinking is a good thing. Though I do think that being hungry is a good concentrator.
Oh, really?
Can you still hear me?
How do you?
The internet went a little bit there.
Yeah, I can hear
Yeah, I
you.
do think that. Yeah, I think that being hungry is a good concentrator, and in the same, if you think about like with how you think and how you feel after eating a big meal, like when you're full, like it's hard to focus on things. You just feel tired and things like that. So if you think about the opposite of that, when you're hungry. And I've even heard that when you need the bathroom, you focus better on things.
Mm.
Um, so I guess maybe I play into a little bit of that. I don't feel quite so bad about not eating or drinking because of those things. At the end of the day, it does work for me. So I'm going to try and keep doing the same things. I use the same deck box that I used
Mm.
for Worlds. So maybe I've got a little bit of... So 2 Worlds, I've used the same green deck box. For a long time, it had like a piece of tape with my name on from the first Worlds that I
Mm.
kept on it for a long time. So maybe there's a bit of superstition going there.
So when it comes to Flesh and Blood and going to those big tournaments, you already talked about some major distances that you want to travel and that you already traveled in Flesh and Blood. Like it's challenging to do that and also coming up with the time to do such things. You already talked about your wife being supportive, but what is it really that you come up with to managing the time that you need to travel to all these events?
So in the past, I'm a software developer by trade. That's the work that I do, which means I can work from anywhere that I can sit with a laptop. I don't even necessarily need an internet connection to do my work. So for a lot of and I work on different projects and for different companies. So for a lot of the work I do, I can work while I travel and work in airports and things like that. So it's not quite as big of a sacrifice to like take the time off. Um, so like that's a big boon. I can take time off. I'm self-employed. I can take time off whenever I choose to, so I can manage my finances. Like, I'm never like going, oh, I need to ask for this holiday or anything like that. I'm fully in control of
Yeah.
that. I don't have kids, which is again really helpful. So there's not, I'm not leaving my wife at home with kids while I go gallivanting around playing cards and things like that.
Yeah.
I think it really helps that she knows that I'm good at the game. So like she gives me a lot of freedom to go and pursue it because she likes watching me as well. Like her mum as well watches me on YouTube. She
Nice.
doesn't really understand what's going on, obviously, but she watches me. And yeah, when I traveled to Japan, I had a 10-hour layover in China, which was something I will not be doing again. It's probably one of the worst days of my life, trying to travel through that. So I'm still learning on the whole traveling around sort of thing. And I'm lucky enough that I can afford to do all of these things as well. Obviously, there's a big price tag that comes with not only traveling, but having access to all the cards. So, for example, I was saying about maybe playing Memphis at the end of January. So this is just after the sets come out. Obviously, if I wanted to play the new Arachne, something like that, I'm going to need a lot of new cards in the set, which aren't going to be cheap, things like that. So, like I say, I'm lucky in the fact that I can afford to make these moves and make these trips. So I guess I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, definitely. It's something special that not everyone can do, and I think also that it's a special time, in your life, maybe even. Like I'm not sure like how long, Flesh and Blood will be around, but we are all gathering in this game because we believe in it and that it will stick around for a long time. And maybe we, meet each other again in 10 or 20 years, still playing at these competitive events. I mean, I'm not playing at these competitive events, but I'm there to make videos. But it's something very interesting because I also think that for a lifetime of a TCG player, it's not always possible to do these things, right? When you're not living off of it, or even when you're not making something back of it, at least when you don't have the funds for it. And that's something that you can fastly forget when being in this circle of TCG players, where it's like so normal to spend like 2,000 euros on a trip to go to a TCG tournament. And for some, it's like, I've been there and I've not made money back. And so I'm very curious on your side here, like maybe you can tell us like how much money you made on Flesh and Blood and what kind of part does that play in competing in this game for you?
Yeah. So I think there is a spreadsheet somewhere. I think someone like keeps track or tries to keep track of like the all-time winning list of Flesh and Blood, and
I think it's Erica, right?
that's right. Yeah, and I'm actually she's got my numbers wrong, but not through her own fault because at the first Worlds, me and my quarterfinals opponent Dan Rakowski, we had a little deal, like we had a split deal. So even though I lost in the quarterfinals, I actually made more money than the quarterfinals would make. I think on paper I'm somewhere around $20,000 to $25,000. Last Worlds, I think I got around £10,000, which is around $12,000 to $13,000, maybe $14,000. And then this Worlds, I think I got around £7,000, which is around $10,000. And then obviously there's things like the smaller winnings like battle hardens and gold foils and stuff like that, which goes along with it. Sorry, was there a question in addition to how much I'd won?
Yeah, like what kind of role does that play for you? Like making the money back or investing your own money?
Yeah, so I don't really buy much. I don't really spend money on things outside because I'm the sort of person where when I do something, I do that, and I don't really do much apart from that. So I have like other hobbies. I'll play like video games. I'll play like Overwatch. I might watch TV and things like that. But for the most part, my hobby is playing Flesh and Blood. So when it comes to like what I spend my money on, apart from like necessities like paying the mortgage, paying for shopping, paying for things for my dogs and stuff like that, most of my money goes on what I want to do with Flesh and Blood. That enables me to I guess do all these things. And like I say, I've got enough income from the work that I do to be able to cover my expenses for the most part. That might change in the next few years because obviously like personal life comes into it, and we might be having kids in the next few years and things like that, which obviously drastically change things. I'll probably go to maybe 1 or 2 less callings per year. But I think a huge part of it as well is having a wife that plays Flesh and Blood. So my wife Lila is renowned in the UK for being one of the better, if not the best, female Flesh and Blood player in the UK. And I would probably say, her and Erica are probably somewhere, up there in the top 5 for Europe. So she understands and she knows how much it means to me, and she loves holidays, so she loves traveling at any opportunity she can to go to different things.
Yeah.
The next Pro Tour after London is in the APAC region, and it falls during her summer holidays because she's a teacher. So she's hoping to go to that event with me, so gives me the permission to go play it.
Hey, that's awesome. That's really, really nice, actually, that you can share that experience together and also understand each other on another level. It is kind of interesting that you mentioned like traveling together to these events too, because it's not only about like being one of the best players or competing in the TCG tournaments, but everything that surrounds that lifestyle, right? And it is very interesting. Like I think every TCG has something special to it, but I think in Flesh and Blood in particular, like this year, Japan just got introduced to the game with their own language. And that opened up so many possibilities in the future, right? And you even mentioned it, the Osaka World Championship this year. But how do you view like the competition all around the world? It was kind of interesting, right? Seeing how Pro Tour Amsterdam was being fought out in the end. But how do you view like the competition? Was it like any more drastically changing in this year compared to the other years that you played Flesh and Blood?
I think pretty much every Pro Tour has felt like the same difficulty to me, I guess, in terms of like quality of players and things like that. I mean, because of how pairings are obviously just a random thing, and sometimes you get lucky through the pairing structure and sometimes you don't. Two different players can have such a different experience at the same tournament of like, oh man, all I've done is play against this Guardian today, and like Guardian, I've played against 6 Wizards, and like another guy I'll say he's always played against his Ninja, and then there's so many different experiences that players can have in the same tournament. And to be honest, I feel like it's been overall fine, overall good quality. Like it's very different playing in a Pro Tour than it is to play in a calling, I would say. Like that's very noticeable. And again, battle hardened to a calling again feels noticeably different, especially as you move through to the later rounds. So like it's you definitely see the delineation, I think, from there. But in terms of the different Pro Tours, I think they've all felt around the same to me, I would say.
Yeah. And how do you view like the variant that is going on in Flesh and Blood? I think that's the right thing to say, right? With the different heroes being available to play at the top of Flesh and Blood. I think this year we saw it again and again that it is possible to pilot like different strategies and heroes to the top. And do you view that as something good, something bad, or what is your opinion on this?
No, I think it's great for the game. Yeah, I think a top 8. I think LSS will probably see it as a win if they see a top 8 of a calling or a Pro Tour with 8 different heroes. I think that's nothing. That can't be a bad thing. I mean, if you look at the other end of the spectrum, so maybe look at the Living Legend calling list last weekend just gone, where you've got quite a lot of Starvo and things like. People generally don't like to see that. People like to see a little bit of variety. So some of the more competitive players will say that they feel like it's bad for them because they feel like it's harder to approach a meta game when there's so many different things you have to worry about and stuff like that. And I can understand that. I've definitely thought that before. But it's just one of them things that as a meta game carries on and as a meta game gets more and more defined, the better players will find a place to attack it. So at the start of this new meta game with the Hunted, I think it's going to be quite difficult to pin down what decks are going to be played, and that means that if you're taking a deck that has, it needs to know what the field's going to look like in order to build your deck, then it's going to be more difficult. For decks like what I play, so like I prefer to play more aggressive decks. Like I don't really care what you're doing. I'm just going to send attacks for 4 with Go again at you with on hits, and you're not going to like that. It doesn't matter what you're playing. So, yeah.
So I really want to see like your way in the next year, definitely. I mean, we see us early on in the year in Prague. But I want to know, like, when you're talking about your life and what role Flesh and Blood takes up in that, is there anything that you're cutting in your life in order to spend that much time for Flesh and Blood?
Currently, not so much. I think I was playing a little bit of One Piece earlier on in the year, and I've just but I stopped playing that because I generally won't play a card game unless I think I can win tournaments.
Yeah.
And I felt like for One Piece is quite a difficult game. It's similar to Flesh and Blood in a lot of ways, where you need to know what the other hero does. Um, and I couldn't commit the time to it to do well enough, so I just stopped playing it. Similar, Similarly, I've started playing the new Star Wars game as well, Star Wars Unlimited. And I can't play as much of that as I would want to because I need to commit. Like Flesh and Blood comes above everything in terms of like in my spare time. So if I can't perform in other things as well as I would like to because of Flesh and Blood, then basically it gets the chop. Is the is my approach to it. Yeah. So I guess short answer is I don't think it's really stopping me doing anything that I want to do because all I want to be doing is playing Flesh and Blood at the top level, really. Yeah.
So you're talking a little bit about these other games, right? Like One Piece and Star Wars Unlimited. And your urge like to compete in these games is not about only playing the game, but also being like on the top of the game. What is it really that like made that spark for you come up in Flesh and Blood and not in One Piece, for example?
I think if I would have found One Piece at the time I found Flesh and Blood, it could have very easily, because I was looking for something basically to replace Magic with, something where you sit down from an opponent with cards, and if I can find something and it has a tournament structure, it might have replaced, it might have been the focus. One Piece might have been the focus instead of Flesh and Blood. The one thing I think that Flesh and Blood does better than any other card game, so you mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh, it's One Piece, Star Wars, all these other things. So basically just the organised play. So like we've got Worlds, we've got Protoss, we've got Callings, we've got Battle Hands, we've got Progress, we've got even skirmishes and things like that. Like all of this sort of foundation for the path to how you become, one of the best players in the world and how you compete. These other games don't really have it so much. I know Yu-Gi-Oh has like a world championship and things like that, but I don't think it's the same. It's not as well supported financially, and like Magic, they're basically taken, from what I can tell, they've looked at what Magic was like and gone, when was Magic the best, and when did people love it the most? Let's do that. And let's take away all the bits that people didn't like, which is a really nice place to be because Magic was like, ahead of its time really, and like it was the first one really treading the path for that. They have like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh alongside it, but Magic was doing like Protoss way back in like the year 2000 and things like that. So it's really lucky that Flesh and Blood has the hindsight to be able to look at that and take the best.
Yeah. So I think this is one of the most important topics in Flesh and Blood, actually, right? People are even talking about Flesh and Blood in terms of like being the most competitive TCG out there. And is that like a statement that you would underline, or what do you view the statement like?
Yeah, I can't think of one more so. Like the only one in my mind, I mean, you could make the argument that One Piece is more competitive because some of the prizes at the top, but they have like these prize cards like that are worth millions and things like that. But there's nothing quite like seeing, Flesh and Blood puts out advertisements saying things like $100,000 in prizes and things like that. No other game does that. Like Magic still has the tournament scene and things like that, but the amount of hoops you have to jump through in Magic to be able to play at the top level is just ridiculous. Like you've got to win a local tournament, and then you get to go to like a big qualifier only calling basically, and you have to do well at that. And if you do well at that, then you can go to the Pro Tour. It's ridiculous. I just don't think it's sustainable for like an ordinary, what I think of as an ordinary player to be able to do. Um, so I think Flesh and Blood is the most competitive game out there, and I'm hoping that because they put another chunk of money up for the Player of the Year going forwards, and I just hope they know what they're doing because I want this game to be around for the next 10 years. I want to, like you say, I want to see you at tournaments in 10, 20 years from now, and I just hope that it keeps going. I hope they're doing well. I assume they are.
Yeah, I think so too. And I can only, like you said, hope the best for them in the future too. But I think it's super interesting that we are in this time where like we not only have 1, 2, or 3 TCGs having competitive tournaments out there, but actually a vast variety of them. And actually, in the second episode of the Fabled Academy podcast, I'm talking to Kang, an old friend of mine from the Yu-Gi-Oh days, and he's competing in Disney Lorcana at the top at the moment. And I talked to him about his experience there, and Disney Lorcana at the top is also very competitive, but vastly different from Flesh and Blood, of course. But I think it's just so nice to see that we are in this environment where there are different options for players to choose from, whether they are coming from Yu-Gi-Oh, wanting to switch to something else, coming from Magic, or just wanting to try out a new game. And that makes it so interesting to me because then it's actually something that these TCG companies have to compete in themselves, right? Not only the players competing at the tournaments, but they actually need to do something to craft an environment that a player like yourself feels comfortable putting his time and his money in the whole year or even a century. And
Yeah, and I mean, I have quite an extensive collection now, which I sometimes get a little bit worried about when I think of because I'm like thinking, God, I really like I've kept the gold foils that I've won from the tournaments.
yeah.
If I turn my camera, you might be able to see them. Actually, you can see them up there with my
Oh, yeah.
trophies in the top corner. So there's some,
Nice.
and I see them and I'm like, they are nice, but I do hope that they don't just become worthless in the future. Yeah,
So this whole collection thing is something that like always interests me because like as a pro player you kind of have to have access to all of the cards like all the time, right? I even talk to pro players that tell me like we have multiple decks with us and then sometimes we decide on it like last second which deck we are playing in the tournament. And that's not only an investment in money, but also an investment in like a space that you have and keep track and keep care of these cards, right? How are you viewing this topic?
I tend to lock in before I go to something. I can't remember a time I've ever done well where I've swapped onto something else. Um, but yeah, I can definitely like I try to have everything as much as possible. There are some classes that I tend to not really focus too much on. Like you'll never really see me playing Guardian. That's something I tend to shy away from. But yeah, I try and have access to as much as I possibly can as quickly as I can. So like there was a tournament in the UK when Pat Misfeld just came out, and I managed to get all the cards I needed to play Zen, which was a big deal. Obviously, fully powered Zen was a menace, so it was good to have access to that for the tournament. But yeah, and I also like when I'm traveling to Barcelona and Prague, January, February next year, and I try to just take one bag if I can because I hate waiting for my luggage to come out the other side. I like to just get off the plane and go, and it makes it a little bit cheaper as well. So that's how I like to travel.
So would you say that like when a competitive player watches this and thinks about like getting into Flesh and Blood, like it is definitely possible to like look at a certain area of the game and then decide on that and take that road and go with Flesh and Blood that way? Like maybe choosing one like a class, or like you said it, you are drawn to a playstyle, the aggro playstyle, for example, and that is totally doable, right?
Yeah. So some people think that there's a massive benefit to being like a specialist in something. So like being, choosing one thing, sticking to it, and then doing it as best you can. I think but then I just think of all the players that are so-called Dorinthia specialists, and Dorinthia has like never really won anything. I think And I do think it's important to be able to swap to different things. Like Michael, is it Fung? I think it's Fung. Michael Fung will play, whatever he thinks the best deck is. He could play different decks to different decks for different weeks, things like that. And I think that's part of being a player at the very top. You need to be able to be malleable and pick up different things. There are outliers, like you'll see decks like Kano, which some players will never pick up. I mean, I've played quite a lot of Kano and I really enjoyed. I mean, not so much these days when he's had all the bans and stuff, but one thing I really didn't like about playing him was that I felt like if my opponent had prepared enough, it didn't matter how much better than them I was going to lose anyway. So that goes into my choice of deck. I think if you're a competitive player and you want to get into Flesh and Blood, if you're competitive like, I don't know, Lorcana or Flesh or Magic or One Piece player or whatever, and you want to get into Flesh and Blood, I'd probably just look at some of the top decks from tournaments. This is what I did when I wanted to get into Star Wars. Look at the top decks from some tournaments, try and understand what they're doing and how they're different. So, like, why is Aurora different to Viserai, and why is that different to Enigma, and why is that different to, like, Victor, for example? What are they all trying to achieve? And then just pick one and go with it, I think, is what I would say. It's nice if you have the money to be able to swap around, because obviously you might not, the deck that you choose might not end up being a good thing in the future, and hopefully you've got people around you to be able to help you, I guess.
Yeah. So before we come to the final part of the video, I want to shout out the future episodes coming to the Fabled Academy podcast, because I actually have a Patreon and also YouTube memberships available where there's early access to these future episodes. So Rob, let's come to the last part of the pod, and that is actually the next year coming around. And I want to know, like, we talked about this highlight already, the top 8 at the World Championship this year. But what was really like your favorite moment of this year's journey? Was it like the realization when you come to the top 8, or was it like a different moment?
It's really, really difficult to be better than that moment, to be honest. Like yeah. I mean, was me winning the Battle Hardened with Prism this year? I think it was, right?
I think it was this year, right?
Yeah, that was really cool. That was really, really cool because it was so surprising to people, and like it was the first time ever with that hero, and people hadn't like seen it be played. And now these days, when you see Prism being played, you see the cards that I was using back then. Not because I was using them, but like it sort of like set the tone for like this is what this deck does, and I was the first person to like really make that happen. Me and my friend Jake worked on that, so like that was really cool. I think that them two are the top 2. Let's say it's hard. Like I say, it's hard to get past Worlds, but I think the other one was the Battle Hardened. Yeah.
So we also talked about what you disliked about Flesh and Blood this year, but when it comes to the next year, what is it really that you are looking forward to the most in the next year for Flesh and Blood?
Going to so many events, because like I'm just gonna crank it up even further than before, and I'm really excited that my friend Liam, who I prepare for events with, is also going to be doing it as well. Like he said no more family holidays. Them days holiday that I've got are going to be Flesh and Blood days. He said he's going to become a degenerate. So so I'm really looking forward to that. And the new set's so exciting. I love that like these sets are so impactful, and the artwork looks really cool in this next one. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, actually, I didn't think about this question, but it just pops up. Like, do you think actually that you will play Fi again in the next year, or?
I'd like to play Engulfing Flame Wave again. Yeah, and I think I'm right in saying that when they made this set, they thought that Fire would already be living legend. So like this is meant to be Syndra, is that her name?
Yeah.
She's meant to be there to like be picking up the Draconic Ninja cards that are meant to be unplayable right now because Fire's living legend, but he hasn't. So I wonder if that means there's some stuff in there that's just going to be really good with Fi that they weren't really thinking about, or maybe they don't mind that it's just going to get him straight to living legend. So Hopefully.
All right. So is there then anything that like from your personal life is a highlight for you in the next year? Is there anything coming up?
Well, I got married this year, so that's already that's already happened. Um, no, I think unfortunately I'm quite boring in that regard. Uh, I got a new job recently, but yeah, nothing comes springs to mind. I might try and buy a new house next year if I do well enough at Flesh and Blood.
Oh,
That was going to be on the cards if I did well enough. If I won Worlds, we would have got a new house. But
yeah.
yeah.
So is there then anything here at the end that you want to say to the viewers, or maybe a shout out that you want to give?
Yeah, I think just shout out to Liam, who I prepare for all the events for, and he helped me a lot. I basically wouldn't have been in the world's top 8 without him, so big shout out to him. And yeah, I think the UK is. I mean, looking at the top, is it the top? The leaderboard for like the Player of the Year right now. You see the British flag a few times in that. You've got Jake Clements, you've got Alex Chitu on there, and hopefully in the next few months I'm going to be popping up on there as well. So it's a pretty good time for UK Flesh and Blood, and hopefully we can keep it going.
Yeah, best of luck definitely to not only you, but also the other UK players in the future. And yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you in Prague in January. And actually, I have to say, like, this is the last episode of 2024 here on the Fabled Academy Podcast. So I want to wish you, guten Rutsch, as we say it in German, and also to the viewers, all the best for the next year. And if any viewer is hungry for another episode, of course, there's one popping up on the screen now.
Yeah, happy Christmas and a good New Year.